I'm Gary, and this is Coastin' with Culture, which is all about combining theme park visits and riding roller coasters with various cultural experiences around the world. After arriving to the greater Rome area, it was time for making a lot of coaster stops. Beginning with one of the area's larger theme parks that features a surprise treat of a coaster and some interesting dark rides. Then comes a series of shameless coaster stops that includes a loop around the Italian capital for several of them, and a final stop the following day at the last Italian theme park of the trip. Our busiest Italian coaster day began with a visit to MagicLand, one of the last major Italian theme parks on our itinerary. It became apparent that this park would be on par with Gardaland for cleanliness and overall maintenance, while potentially being a step up in the level of theming. The park's biggest coaster, Shock, would turn out to be a great surprise, as this Mauer Rides product may start with a bit of a convoluted pre-launch section, but once it hits the first set of magnets, the punchy launch sends you right into an airtime hill, and it's followed by a non-inverting loop, a high-speed low turn, the mid-course brakes which drop into another low helix, and ends with a corkscrew that has some nice hang time. All told, this ride was better than I expected it to be, as my more recent experiences with larger Mauer coasters had not been all that great, so it was nice to see they could make a ride that stands out in a good way. From a unique coaster to a common clone, our next ride came aboard Dune, their Vekoma roller skater with the same layout as Flight of the Hippogriff at Universal Studios Islands of Adventure, which is the biggest of the family coaster type. A fun ride for the additional coaster credit. Just across the path was one of the weirdest dark ride experiences, a Gatto Baleno time machine. The ride was previously themed to an Italian cartoon called Planeta Winx, but went away with the end of the licensing contract the park had with a television production company called Rainbow. And rather than give it a proper retheme, they instead have you put on a set of virtual reality goggles, having you go through time with the park's mascot. While it's cute, the use of virtual reality felt more like a cheap fix rather than retheming the ride. Hopefully they eventually will give it a proper retheme and make it a better experience. The park's lock flume, Nui Lua, felt like a ride built for a smaller park as it sits on a small plot of land and isn't among the most elaborately themed flumes. However, it is a ride that won't absolutely drench you, which is nice for those not wanting to come off the ride soaking wet. Heading toward the back of the park, we found that maintenance workers were testing out their wacky worm style coaster, Esplora Bruco, which was a good indication that we'd need to come back. So we continued with a ride on the very unique Cagliostro, a custom SC3000 spinning coaster from Mauer, which throws you for a bit of a surprise, because the initial small lift hill and brief outdoor turn make it seem like it's going to be pretty tame, but then you're thrown into a sizable first drop that goes below the park's main ground level, so it turns out to be no slouch of a ride. For those who aren't fans of spinning, what might be considered the second best coaster in the park is their Vekoma mine train, Olandesi Volante, which means Flying Dutchman in Italian. It's a fairly standard layout of the model, so the ride experience won't necessarily stand out, although the wheels on our car felt like they were octagons rather than circles. But in regards to theming, this is certainly one of the most unique looking trains on a coaster, as they go for a futuristic ship appearance. To complete the park's coaster collection, we returned to Esplora Bruco and found that it was in fact open. While it was yet another wacky worm to join the many we had already ridden on the trip, this one at least had the added bonus of being the elongated version like the one at Energylandia, even if it feels like they just added 4 extra straight pieces just to make it a slight bit longer. With the successful completion of the coasters, we took some time to enjoy other rides in the park, including Huntic 5D, their shooting dark ride where you battle mythological creatures, and Le Rapide, a rapids ride that was one of the more mild ones I've been on. Our last ride of the day was on Maison Houdini, a Vekoma madhouse that goes a bit beyond the traditional ride experience, starting off with a pre-show that offers a live magician, and then heading to an elevator that takes you down into the mansion's basement, where you'll find the main madhouse experience, taking you on a fun and disorienting ride. While there are many attractions that will simulate the elevator ride down, this one actually takes you down to a lower floor for the ride, and requires you to take an elevator back up to the surface. There's a part of MagicLand that feels a little bit incomplete compared to other larger Italian parks, mainly because of how they seem to go cheap for some of their attractions, like with the virtual reality cover-up rather than a full retheme of a dark ride. Outside of those circumstances though, the park is pretty well kept, and there's some really fun rides, especially what could be a dark horse contender for favorite coaster of Italy for those who come here to check them out. The park also gets bonus points for having shelters for cars to help keep them cool, which made our next drive much more comfortable. So not a bad way to kick off a long coaster hunt that would have us stopping at 9 more venues, making it one of the biggest one-day coaster runs I've ever been on. Have you ever spent a day visiting multiple parks to ride as many coasters as you could? If so, what was the most different parks you've gone to in the same day, and what parks were they? Share your experiences in the comment section below. In the entirety of the day's coaster hunt, this was probably the most enjoyable drive, as we passed through a few small towns and got to enjoy the scenic beauty of the Alban Hills, the caldera remains of an Italian volcanic complex. Going through such terrain led us through some narrow city streets and even a questionable road or two, but in a rather neat twist, we had a rather steep downgrade through a tunnel, which led us into a volcanic crater where you can see one of the caldera's most visible peaks, Monte Cavo. And within the volcanic crater is the lovely Lago Albano, which was the site of the canoeing and rowing events of the 1960 Summer Olympic Games. Our stop here was Lagolandia, so we could ride their Zamperla-powered coaster, Dragon. But there was a bit of a dilemma, as the park was showing no signs of life. This was one of those smaller parks in which finding information on it was fairly difficult, and likely wouldn't open until later in the evening. Yeah, it was a missed coaster ride, but considering the type it was and how successful we'd been overall up to this point in the trip, it didn't seem so bad. Plus the drive was still quite enjoyable. Getting back on the road, we continued heading closer to the center of Rome, finding ourselves on the outskirts of a more residential part of town where finding parking was tricky, but we did find a spot that seemed like it would work for a quick coaster ride. Although the neighborhood's layout made for a longer walk to get around to Luneur Park Coco, home to yet another wacky worm. But there would be another dilemma, as this park was also showing no signs of life, save for maybe one person roaming the backside. It seemed like this park, like Lagolandia, probably opened later in the evening, so with a second missed coaster, it was back to the car to continue the coaster hunt. The next stop began a 7-park loop around the center of Rome, which would end on the Italian capital's south side, and it began with the 4th stop of the day, Oasi Park. Unlike the other 2 stops, Oasi was in fact open, and so was their coaster Minnie Mouse, an interpark coaster that seemed like a unique Wacky Worm variant that has a bigger drop rather than the mini dips after the lift. It was a cute ride, and more importantly, a successful credit gained. So with the momentum shift, we went north to stop number 5. As some of the parks had closing times within the next few hours, finding nearby parking would be critical to make all of these stops work. Unfortunately, Rome's a pretty busy city though, and that meant having to make do with adding some small hikes, which would be the case for our next stop, Cartoon Park, home to what was definitely the most questionable ride on the itinerary, Bruco. Now I've got a pretty open mind for what folks will count as a coaster, but calling this thing one was by far a huge stretch of the imagination in my opinion. But I still rode it since we were here because why not?
That was sad.
I can safely say though that I personally would not count this one. After the walk back to the car, we went on one last stop on the east side of Rome, which fortunately had its own parking lot, Luneur Park, which I was starting to believe was the name of half of the parks in the country. It was a fascinating park because in some respects they really tried to spruce it up, and in other ways it just had that permanent carnival feel, as several rides were likely portable, including their powered coaster, which was either called 5 Velocità or Niagara, depending upon which of the ride's signage you go by. The Niagara name was an interesting choice, but it made a lot more sense when they got the ride going, as it had a working waterfall that you circled around. After another successful coaster pickup, we were on the road once again, heading to the west side. While most of the driving around Italy had been quite pleasant and easy, Rome was a totally different animal, as drivers here seemed far more aggressive than they were anywhere else we had been, and the way traffic would move seemed to replicate what you would find in some third world countries. So if you're a bit uncomfortable behind the wheel in such situations, driving might not be the best option, but with our time crunch as the next few parks were within their last hour of operation for the day, this was the way we had to do it. And luckily the next park had its own lot, so we could make a quick stop of Eden Park and a ride on Brucomela. Easy in, easy out was exactly what we needed, as we had just over an hour for the next two parks. One of those two parks was Family Park, which didn't have its own parking, but there were several spaces nearby, so it was easy to get in and make quick work of their cam baby cart powered coaster, Speedy Bruco. Since the last few stops went so smoothly, we had around a half hour to spare for stop number 9, which also had the worst parking availability. So when in Rome, we did as the Romans do, and made an open space in the median our parking spot, which was just a short walk over to Parco Morelli, featuring a figure 8 style coaster from SBF Visa. While it had been a long day with a ton of parks, we still had time for one last stop that stayed open later into the night, and one that I'd been curious about for a long time, Luneur Park. Located in the south side of Rome, this was the nicest of the parks that came after MagicLand, as it has that kind of garden feel that several other European amusement parks are well known for. It's previously had larger coasters, including Vertigo, which we rode the day before at Zoo Marine. But today, the largest coaster is a fairly unique spinning coaster, aptly named Spinner, which comes from EOS Rides. This almost felt like a sort of next evolution for the SBF Visa Spinner coasters because of the larger layout, but some of the transitions could be a bit jarring depending upon which direction you were facing when you went through them. Then our final ride of this long coaster hunting day was Brucomela, which also featured a larger drop after the lift rather than the typical Wacky Worm layout, although this ride had a bit of an unintended twist.
Well, we had a little mishap on the Wacky Worm here because we went a little too far. So we gotta wait for maintenance to come and help us out.
Luckily though, a few maintenance guys came and got us back in place so we could exit safely. It was at that point that we made our way back to the hotel and took a short walk over to the restaurant we enjoyed the night before. It was a long day going to all those parks, but we still had one more to visit in the morning. The last theme park of our visit in Italy was less than 10 years old, and that was Cinecittà World, another movie studio theme park which was built on the former Dinocita Studios and features sets created by Italian producer Dante Ferretti. Walking through the park's main entrance, you find yourself in an area inspired by Manhattan of the 1920s. This part of the park features a small museum with a variety of sculptures and busts that had been in about 30 different movies over the years. While waiting for the park's rope drop, you can meet some rather well-known characters and take in the park's welcome show. Once it was time to open the rides, we went over to the Roma section for a ride on Actium, a mock super splash themed after the Battle of Actium, which took place in 31 BC. While this looks a lot like your typical Shoot the Chutes ride, variations of this mock product have been listed on different websites as a water coaster, but the likes of Roller Coaster Database don't have this one listed, even though the track it runs is potentially longer than that of Journey to Atlantis in SeaWorld San Antonio. So this could either convince you that the ride should count as one, or that the ride in Texas shouldn't. Either way, this was a pleasant ride as many Shoot the Chutes can be. Although it was kind of incredible that the park would just lay out their fireworks right alongside the path the way they did, as opposed to having them in an area not accessible by guests. Add this to the list of things you would never see in the US. Departing from ancient Rome, we continued into the future of space with the first undisputed coaster, Altair, an Intamin 10 inversion coaster which has the exact same layout as Sick in Flamingo Land. And just like Sick, the hang time on the barrel rolls is legendary. Easily the highlight of this coaster. As we departed a neat-looking science fiction section, we strolled over to their Wild West town, but couldn't get further due to the staggered opening times. I will say though that this might have been one of the most genuine-looking Wild West towns I've seen in a theme park, complete with legitimate dirt walkways, just like they would have been at that time. And the facades did a great job of capturing the look of an old western town. Plus they had a nice saloon for cooling off and enjoying some drinks and snacks. Trying to get to the other areas of the park proved to be quite confusing and challenging, as the layout is such where you have small corridors leading to closed attractions, and some of the most direct ways were blocked off for some reason, so you'd have to find some random opening in the bushes to get to the other side. Fortunately, we would finally find our way to the park's other coaster, Inferno, an Intamin coaster that had a ton of projections that added quite a bit to what otherwise would have just been a dark and enclosed ride. One of those projections is used in connection to a thrilling moment in the ride that Intamin has incorporated in a few of their coasters now with the drop track. Those projections, combined with the ride's layout, make for a really fun ride that does a great job supporting Altair and could make a case for being Italy's best 1-2 coaster punch. Friends of ours who had been at the park a few days earlier suggested we check out their food festival they had going on, but unfortunately it seemed that either they didn't start until later or they weren't offering it that day. So we went ahead back to the entrance area to grab lunch at Ristorante Charleston, inspired by more elegant restaurants of 1920s New York, and it would be the last time I'd have carbonara in Italy, which might not have been quite the best of the trip, but it was still of decent quality. Having this massive hunt around Rome was a great way to wrap up our coaster riding in Italy, even if a few of those stops proved unsuccessful or potentially not worth the time. But within those that we did, there were some easy +1 opportunities and a couple of really nice parks that offered some surprisingly great rides. While the coaster riding in Italy was complete for this adventure, we still had some exploring to do in one of the world's most historic cities. Thank you for watching this video from Coasting with Culture. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button to see future videos here on YouTube, like these ones which you may enjoy as well. Additional content can be found at coastingwithculture.com, and you can also follow Coasting with Culture on various social media channels at CoastWCulture for announcements, previews, and updates. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care and safe travels.